Alright, is this good? Hey guys, my name is Victoria, welcome back to my channel. We're in a different location, a bit. I thought I'd change it up, just sometimes. If you don't like it, just tell me and I will change it back. I thought this would be good for this video because I will insert some pictures on this side. Alright, what are we gonna do today? This is my third video of the day, so if I don't look my best, if I don't speak my best, it's because of that. Today, we're going to talk about poetry because I'm wearing the dress. It's the dress, and whenever I wear this, we're talking about poetry on this channel. Making that a rule now. What kind of poetry are we talking about today? This is a video I filmed 4 times. I kid you not, 4 times. And each time, I did not like it, and the last video that I did, that I actually liked, was too long for me to edit because my laptop is a bitch. We're doing it again, hopefully in a more concise and shorter way. I think we're gonna start right away. Now, I thought long and hard if I should make a video like this, if I should share my opinion on this kind of poetry. I will tell you in a second what kind of poetry I mean. And in the end I thought, yeah, why not? Why not share my mustard? That's actually translated to the German seinen Senf dazugeben, which means just you also need to give your opinion on this. Yeah, don't ask me. I made a list on things. I have a bunch of books right here next to me that I all read and some recommendations for you later. Now today we're going to talk about modern poetry, Insta poetry. It has many names. Can it be called poetry? Is this poetry for me? What does it do? What does it not do? Looking at everything from an artistic point of view. Now, first of all, a disclaimer. If you like any of these books, if you like any of these poems, if you like such writing, please do not feel offended. If you love this writing, I'm so happy for you. This is just my opinion. And again, I'm not looking at it from a philosophical, evolutional point of view, just from the artistic side of poetry, what I love about poetry and what it means to me. Again, if you don't agree with my opinion, that's totally fine. Please continue reading these books. I'm happy for you if you like them. I'm not an expert. I study English, though I only completed my 2nd semester. So the 2nd semester had 0 on poetry, so I'm a noob. This is all things that I learned on my own, through school, through university, through educating myself on the internet. I'm gonna link an amazing channel down below. Her name is Rachel Oates, who really inspires me because she dissects poetry collections, and if you want a deeper dive into that kind of thing, then definitely give her channel a follow or a subscription or just a watch because highly recommended. Before we start, I want to tell you what books we're going to talk about. I read all books by Rupi Kaur. I read a book by Amanda Lovelace, Courtney Peppernell, and Atticus. We are going to look at some of the poems, but because I know I can't make it too long, I try to make it as concise as possible. I just want to give you some examples of what I mean. So these are the authors we're going to talk about today. We're first going to talk about basics about poetry, things that I love, things that I think are important, some examples of that. Then I'm going to dive into the authors, give you some examples, and after that, a little like verdict of what I think about this new kind of poetry, this new kind of writing. I had a class last year, my 1st semester, Introduction to Literature. And we talked about poetry, the first thing we did. And we talked about the image, so the figurative language in poetry, which you know from school maybe as metaphors and similes, stylistic devices, but the overall term for this is figurative language. Now, we know that there's not really a rule to what is poetry, but what you usually find with poetry, what you found for centuries, is an image. So poetry uses images. Images meaning showing you certain scenarios, certain feelings, letting you really see what the poet is talking about. It is non-literal. When I say I could devour the earth, doesn't mean that I want to eat the earth. You get what I'm saying, right? It adds color and vibrancy to language. It makes the language alive and exciting. It basically means that every single word in a poem has a place and has a reason that it's there and has a point. When I read poetry, for example, when I read a poem, every single word that I use is meticulously calculated. Obviously, that happens a lot when you edit a poem. When you first draft a poem, it doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, and what is a perfect poem, right? But what I think is important, that you value every single word, that you really give language, because that's your tool, your full and utmost attention, and that you make it, as it says, alive and exciting. We all use it in our daily life. We use metaphors, we use similes, we use that kind of image every day, but we do not realize it really. We might not necessarily exercise that consciously, we just do it. But poets use it particularly well in inventive and new ways, so they make it their own. I'm gonna give you some quotes by Mary Oliver, who I think describes poetry in the most amazing ways. Now focusing on figurative language, of course. Figurative language is the language that uses images or figures to create a picture or image in our minds that illuminates an idea, an experience, or a feeling that gives it clarity. The language of the poem is the language of particulars. It is the detailed sensory language incorporating images that gives the poem dash and tenderness and authenticity. Imagery means, generally, the representation of one thing by another thing. A statue is an image. When Robert Burns wrote, "Oh, my love is like a red, red rose," that rose is an image. Burns was using imagery. If Burns had written, "My love is sweet, wild, wonderful, you would like her," he would have been using descriptive language, but no imagery. There is, in the second sentence, no representative image of the beloved person. When we read poetry, we are looking for representative images of the object, feeling, or emotion being described. And here's my swift transition to the next topic, show versus tell. It is already in this quote. So showing would be, "Oh, my love is like a red, red rose," using the image, using an image, the rose, that is contradictory in itself, that is beautiful but has thorns. So a symbol, or an image in this case, I also use the word symbol. I think people would argue that that's not the right term. I don't care. A symbol is not one and the same thing, in my opinion. So a rose has multiple layers, like an onion. You can dissect it. And that's what a poem is. I think a poem is an onion. You can dissect it and pull it apart and put it back together, whatever. The rose is beautiful. She's stunning. She's the queen of the flowers. She exists in multiple colors, but she has thorns. So getting her and gifting her is complicated. You always have to be careful. So when he says, "My love is like a red, red rose," he does not necessarily only mean the good parts and the beautiful parts of it. You need to see all sides to something, and that is beautiful. That is something when you find a symbol, when you find an image in poetry, and you think, "Oh, this is a positive image," maybe think again, because sometimes it's just not. Most symbols, most images are contradictory. A statue, for example, can be the most beautiful thing you can see, but it's not alive. It's simple. You could argue that it's a symbol for death, for someone who is not independent because they are not able to move and they were crafted by someone else. So always think about symbols and images you find. And telling would be the second sentence. "My love is sweet, wild, wonderful. You would like her." Describing things, not showing you things. The thing with description or telling is that it is not the language of particulars. Wonderful, wild, first of all, it's an alliteration, I give you that. But the thing about that is these adjectives are so broad, they describe someone, but they are not describing your someone that you want to talk about, for example. If you want to write about your love and you're using such adjectives, they can mean something to every single person. And here we come to individuality. Individuality in poetry is so important. I believe you can spot a Robert Frost, you can spot a Shakespeare, you can spot a poem by Emily Dickinson, just like you can spot a Picasso or a Van Gogh. It's not actually the way his name is said, but I don't speak Dutch. So it's like a painting. A poet is an artist. So when you write a poem and you use the language of particulars, you use images to describe the feeling, object, experience, whatever, in your language, in the way that it feels like for you. Congratulations, you just made yourself into an individual as a poet. When you tell someone things with these adjectives, you're not really proving the point of individualism and being unique as a poet. Because when I say, "I was so in love with him or with her," I, as someone who is a fan of imagery, who is a fan of this kind of definition of poetry and figurative language, I don't see anything, first of all. And yes, it might be relatable, because if a stranger read this now and they were in love, they could relate to that. But the language is so broad, it basically says nothing. If you use descriptive words, they mean different things to everybody. My love that I feel for someone does not feel the same way like the love that you feel, for example, for someone. It is different because every single person is different. When you have a poem that is relatable, that a bunch of people, millions of people can relate to, some people would say, "Oh yeah, it's so nuanced, it's so like profound." But when you really think about it, it's the opposite. It's so superficial because it uses the most basic descriptive terms that everyone can relate to. Just like in zodiac signs, when you read horoscopes, you find yourself being able to relate to that because it's so general, because it lacks individuality, because it's not you. It does not use unique language. Do not use the language of particulars. So no poet sounds the same, in my opinion. When I read Robert Frost, and after that I read Emily Dickinson, I can see a difference. I gotta say, when I read Rupi Kaur, and after that I read Amanda Lovelace, I don't really spot a difference. We'll get to that in a second. I'm gonna give you examples. Now, I'm gonna give you an example of figurative language. This is a poem by T.S. Eliot, and it's called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And this is a very fun one. I'm gonna read it to you. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. This is so fun because it gives you an exact example of imagery and a fun example of a particular stylistic device that is a lot of fun, as I already said multiple times now, a personification or a metaphor. There's different definitions to it. Sometimes you would argue that's a metaphor, sometimes you would argue that's a personification. I believe this is a personification, but the smog is given a physicality that we associate with a living, breathing, and thinking being and creature. Smog doesn't do that. It cannot linger upon the pools. It cannot lick its tongue into something. It cannot rub its muzzle on the window panes. So what is it? It moves as a cat moves. So this whole thing is about a cat. This beautiful thing is about a cat. Here, an abstract object is animated and brought to life. That's amazing. That's what poetry can do. That's what language can do. Obviously, you don't have to do that, but that's just an example of a stylistic device that you might learn in school. The correct term, apparently, is anthropomorphism. If I said this wrong, I'm sorry. Here's a definition. It's a form of personification in which human qualities are attributed to anything inhuman, usually a god, animal, object, or concept. Inhuman. How did I say this word? Doesn't matter. So, you see, language is amazing. You can do so many things with it. It's so much fun. Something about poetry that I love is that you do not have to analyze it all the time. If you read a poem, hopefully out loud, please read it out loud. If you have no idea how, I'm gonna link a website that has multiple poems that always has an accompanying audio like file, and you can listen to someone read it there. And if you listen to it, I believe you can decide if you like it or not. I think that's how fast it can go. Just like you go into a museum and look at a painting and you can decide, oh yeah, I like this or not. I think it's the same thing with poetry, really. I believe poetry is an art form that can comfort you without giving advice, without telling you what to do. Just like music, just like songs, just like paintings or dancing, whatever, can evoke emotions or make you feel comforted, make you feel less alone, without being relatable. And that is something that I see more and more in this kind of poetry, advice-giving poetry. I could just get an advice-giving book, like a non-fiction book, and then I ask myself, well, should this really be called poetry if it's only giving me advice on how to do things, on how to get over a situation? I believe that poetry can do that in itself without telling you blatantly what to do. I don't need advice on poetry. It makes me feel comforted and makes me appreciate art, and that always makes me feel less alone. That makes me feel good. Obviously that's an individual thing, that's just subjective, of course, but blatantly telling someone what to do and giving advice is, in my opinion, just not the purpose of poetry. Just like a painting is not telling you, you need to be happy. Can do that with colors. That's the amazing thing about art. It does not need to tell, it shows. Rhyme and meter. You learn this in school, you learn these terms for meter, and you try and fail, at least that's my experience, to determine if there's a meter or not. What do they do? Are they important? And what can they do? If you're familiar with stylistic devices, you know that there's a certain thing called enjambement. Basically, an enjambement is the continuation of a sentence without a pause beyond the end of a line, couplet, or stanza. I'm gonna give you an example of my own little poem that I wrote yesterday. I say in this one line, then you tools had cut too deep. Now I'm without feet, legs, arms, and then you threw me aside. So the end could be placed in the next line, but I put it into the fourth line in this poem, for example, because it fit the meter. Left more marble than you wanted. Now I'm without feet, legs, arms, and 8 syllables in both lines. I hope I can count. I'm really bad at this. I'm only trying that. Not every single poem has to have meter or rhyme. Absolutely not. But that's what it can do. When used correctly, there's not really a correctly, but when used geniusly, it can lead you into one direction, lead your thoughts into one direction in which the poem might go, but it goes into a completely different direction. That's what I found in Ocean Vuong's poem Essay on Craft. It's amazing. I'm gonna link it down below. Dakota Warren actually did it as well in one of her poems when she ended the line with I was and continued the line with setting. So the entire sentence would have been I was setting, but she ended the line with I was, and that has purpose. That makes you think, oh, wait, I was. Let's get back for a second. Let's not focus on the setting here. Let's focus on where does she break the line? Where is an invisible sort of full stop? You could say I was, the opposite of I am. Maybe a sign of death or suicidal thoughts. Anyway, that's just a way of starting to analyze a poem. That's what I do. So yes, I do believe that rhyme and meter are important, especially because back in the day, poetry was sung because not many people could read. So people sang these songs, poetry. Songwriting is not very different to poetry writing. I mean, I write songs, so it's not that different. And when you have a certain rhyme and meter, it creates rhythm. If you have a consistent rhyme and meter structure in a poem, you could argue that the speaker is, though the poem might be about, I don't know, heartbreak, being sad, angry, speaker, because of the rhyme and the meter, because everything is so consistent and very, like, tidy, I always call it like that, the speaker feels grounded. They are still stable because the rhyme and the meter and everything is stable as well. If it's the exact opposite, you could argue for the exact opposite. You can say, oh yeah, the speaker is in distress. That is not only shown by the language the speaker uses or the poet uses, but also the rhyme and everything. So yes, it is important if you want to analyze it. Sometimes it can have that purpose. Sometimes it just has the purpose that it just sounds really nice, and you will find the further you get back, I believe, in time, at least that's my experience, I could be totally wrong, you find more poems that are really structured, because now with modern poetry, people might not be such a big fan of this like really structured kind of poem that has a certain way of reading and of listening, and sometimes that's just very complicated and then fences you in. You feel like you're in jail when you read that, so you feel like you're in a cage. Some people argue that a sonnet, which is a very structured, systematic poem or a form of poem, is just old and nobody really wants to read that anymore because you're like, we live in the 21st century. Can we, you know, get a bit more modern? So it's absolutely not necessary to have a rhyme scheme, but it definitely can be used. It's also so much fun. I love rhyming. Now, line breaks. I already talked about this with the enjambements. Are they important? I believe so. A line should end there where the reader knows, okay, this is where I have to, you know, take a breath. It indicates on how you need to read a poem. And let's get to an example, because I believe this is the best example for line breaks maybe not being used in the best of ways. So this is page 47 in Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. And I'm gonna read it, I think the way she wanted it to be read. I don't know, the way that I would read it. And then I'm gonna read it the way that she intended by giving me the line breaks. We're gonna talk about intention later on. No, it won't be love at first sight when we meet. It'll be love at first remembrance. 'Cause I've seen you in my mother's eyes when she tells me to marry the type of men I'd want to raise my son to be like. First of all, this was a bit confusing because the line breaks are really weird. Let me tell you. This is where she breaks the lines. No, it won't be love at first sight when we meet. It'll be love at first remembrance, 'cause I've seen you in my mother's eyes when she tells me to marry the type of men I'd want to raise my son to be like. I would structure it very differently. I believe she did that because it looks nice. I did that myself the first time I wrote poetry. I thought, oh yeah, it would look nice if this was like, you know, it looks a bit like a triangle, that would be cool. But I cannot read it in a nice way. I'm a huge advocate for reading poetry out loud. This just makes it too complicated. I cannot read it. I cannot read it in a nice way. How am I supposed to consume this if I cannot read it out loud? This is obviously, again, just subjective. Some people just don't just read it and be like, oh yeah, that's pretty. But that's not my way. This is my video, my opinion. Line breaks, in my opinion, do matter. And you find this scenario, this random kind of line breaking in all of these books that I read. In all of them. You do not have to use enjambements. You do not have to include a stylistic device at the end of a line if you want to break a line. but it has purpose for the reader because the reader then knows how to read it. And this, sadly, just is another sign of where's the intention? What is your intention with this poem? What was your intention with writing this word? Breaking the line at this point. What was your intention? Here's my next topic. Everything has a purpose. I brushed on that in the beginning, that every single word has value and every single word has their place in a poem. But the most important thing is the particular choosing of words and of line breaks, of maybe even a punctuation. Everything can have purpose. If you've ever analyzed a poem, especially with like, I don't know, a professor at university or with a teacher, and they pointed something out and you were like, what? No, the poet never thought of that. Yeah, maybe that's true, but that just shows how much you can do with poetry and how fun it is. And it's kind of like a puzzle, because when you write poetry, you piece it together and you then see the picture. And when you analyze it, you pull it apart. You pull the pieces apart and then you see something new and something important in every single picture. It's like, do you know these big like pictures that are made by millions of other pictures? I saw this picture of a tiger. In the great scheme, it was a tiger. It was the head of a tiger. But when you zoomed in, you saw all these pictures. And that's, I think, a good metaphor for poetry, because that's what I like a lot. Not general speaking, poetry that I like. Poetry I love looking at. So we have a indifference, negligence really, to line breaks, stylistic devices, rhyme scheme. You do not find a lot of rhyme in these poems. But what I see a lot is wasted potential. In my opinion, a lot of these poems are first draft, things that could have been made into something, things that could have been really amazing even, but the poet decided to leave it as that and not share more, not use that certain metaphor that you even started with. Here's a good example of this in my opinion. You look just like your mother. I guess I do carry your tenderness well. You both have the same eyes, 'cause we are both exhausted. And the hands, we share the same wilting fingers. But that rage, your mother doesn't wear that anger. You're right, this rage is the only thing I get from my father. First of all, this again has a really strange structure. It's really hard for me to read random line breaks, we already established that. But she used the word wilting, indicating flower imagery. You know, flowers wilt. And you could have done something with that. You could have done something with flowers. There's so much in the plant world, so much symbolism, and you could have used that, but you decided not to. And that's of course okay. I just would have liked to go into that topic of this poem, meaning obviously she is a lot like her mother, but the rage she got from her father, that's from my point of view, an interpretation. That's the interpretation of what a poem could have shown you. Ha, you see me using these words? Also, why did she look tender? How does she look tender? There's not really a definition. Everyone kind of knows what tender means, but you could have shown me what tender is, what makes her tender. Another example for this, I think, she writes, the idea that we are so capable of love, but still choose to be toxic. It's just a statement. That's just a statement in my opinion. But she doodles or draws a scorpion next to it. A symbol, an image of toxicity, my opinion. At least when I connect writing to the image. You already have an image. Use that. You could have used that in the poem. You should have, in my opinion. But, you know, that's just my opinion. So we have lots of, like, statement writings. Statements, like, in her newest collection. Honestly, some of these things infuriated me because they put their names on these books. They earn a lot of money. Obviously, I'm so happy for them. Like, go for it. So happy for people who are successful in this industry because it's hard. But they take credit for something that might not be their idea or their creation. In her newest collection on page 19, she writes, "You are lonely, but you are not alone. There is a difference." That is not from Rupi Kaur. Every kid knows that. I read this when I was 10 years old. She takes credit for something that, in my opinion, is not hers to take credit for. And that is dangerous with these books, because they give blatant advice that nobody can really trace. You know, you don't really know who's the creator, who really did it. So that's a good loophole that people created in here, in my opinion. I know this is a bit far-fetched, but this is just blatant advice. Everyone knows. Everyone, in my opinion, knows that there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And she writes it and says, yeah, this is my creation. This is my thing. I created this. But you didn't. He really didn't. There's no individuality. There's no language of particulars. I don't see anything that makes me think, oh yes, this is new, inventive, that Rupi did. And when she uses metaphors, in my experience with her books, because I read everything, and I actually have a long list of things that I wanted to read to you guys, but as we need to keep this a bit shorter, I won't. I'm gonna link the video down below by Rachel Oates. She dove into Milk and Honey. You will see that when she uses metaphors, or when she starts to use metaphors, she doesn't use them enough. She doesn't bring them to their full potential, just like the wilting. She used the word wilting, which is not as broad, which could be called as in the language of particulars in my opinion. It's not really a rule. Use that more. Just use it more. There's so much you can do with it. And when there's image, it is not really thought through. I have this example of one that I thought was a good example on showing you that using an image is just sometimes not enough, at least not for me. Here again, another statement. Be kind to yourself, the way you would be to someone you love. That's a great advice. I agree. But honey, that's no imagery. There's nothing really in there to find. Here it is. Love is not always roses, honey, and tea. Sometimes it is difficult being you, and sometimes it is difficult being me. And in the night, if we are restless and our love struggles to make sense, know that I will fight for us, because I love you, and I know that you love me. I obviously see why people like this. Do not get me wrong. This is writing that people can relate to, that people find themselves reading at night and be like, this is exactly what I needed right now. I read reviews, but I'm looking at it from an artistic point of view. I'm just, again, emphasizing that because I don't want to hear, oh, you know, it has good points. Absolutely does. Absolutely. It has its reason why it's here. And I love that people find this comforting. But I want to talk about the imagery. So she says, love is not always roses, honey, and tea. We already talked about the rose. She says love is not always all positive and butterflies and being and pretty. It isn't. She wants to say that, but uses such vague images and does not describe them. Puts it up there and like, oh yeah, roses, honey, and tea. But what can be said about roses, honey, and tea? A rose we already established, beautiful, but has thorns. There's a dark and a good side. So what do you want to say? It's not really a good symbol for all things shiny and beautiful. That's what she wants to say. Honey. How was honey made? It's actually just spit from a bee. I let honey slide because it is sweet. That's what you mostly think about, obviously. And obviously when you think about a rose, the first thing, at least that's what I think, is majestic, beautiful. Think of her beauty. I know. But I'm diving deeper, okay? I'm diving deeper. That's what I have to do. I'm a poet myself. I have to do this. And tea. Tea. It is warm. It can burn your tongue though if it's too hot. There are so many flavors of tea, and sometimes they're really bitter. Does that fit what you want to say? So when you write a poem, try to find symbols and not just blatantly just tell them and say, oh yeah, love is like a rose, or love is not like a rose. Think about what you want to say, and then give me something more. Even more. If you use a symbol, amazing. You already have done half the job, in my opinion. I mean, but then you need to make it your own, because you cannot claim a rose on your own, you know, you have to make it your own. Again, correcting my language, you do not have to do anything. If you want to write, write. But this is just things that I do when I write. I try to make things my own. I try to make words my own because they're mine. They're my tool. They are my brush to paint with, and I care about the colors that I use, and the colors I use are my words. I do not want this video to be too long. In general, I can say if you want to read any of these authors, Rupi Kaur especially, Google her on Pinterest, because in my experience I've seen her most beautiful ones, because there are pretty ones obviously, not saying I hate everything, come up the second that you look up her name on Pinterest. So maybe do that. If you're a fan of imagery and that kind of poetry, maybe not buy the books, just find them on Pinterest or find the poems on Pinterest. Here she uses another image, but uses it in an advice kind of statement. You do not just wake up and become the butterfly. Growth is a process. These undertitles are always really funny. So yeah, she uses the butterfly. Yay! But I believe if you use an image in an advice statement like this, or an advice tweet, whatever you want to call it, it's dangerous, as we've seen with Courtney Peppernell. She uses roses, honey, and tea, but not necessarily thinks about the other side of that. Not really thinks about what are these images symbols for or symbolic for. For me, that just shows a total disregard to words. And I don't want to argue that that's happening all the time with these books, because you're a poet. You care about words. But nothing that you write makes me think that you care about the words that you use. And I know this sounds crass, I just had to say one time. I've read all of this, and I can tell you, that's my impression. That's what I get. I don't see that you care for what you're writing. I see random words, random line breaks, no rhyme, no rhythm, no nothing. Here's the issue. This absolutely can be a new thing of poetry. For me, I always ask myself the question, when it lacks all the things that poetry is like known for, that we look into poetry. I'm looking at it, of course, from this point of view because I am studying it and I am a poet. You're always thinking this cannot be called poetry because it lacks everything that poetry is, that we've been analyzing and searching for and researching for years. Can you call this poetry? From my opinion, no. I'm blatantly saying it. No. For me, this is not poetry. But if it is for you, I'm happy for you. This also introduced me to poetry. I bought these books. I did not buy these books for this video. I bought these books and read them. And I cannot say that I ever really loved them, but I definitely appreciated them for their time. And I do appreciate them for leading me, or for bringing me into this world of poetry and writing and art, or literal art. I cannot ever say this word. So I'm thankful for them, absolutely. And if they're supposed to be in the poetry category, fine. What I find to be really sad is when you go into a bookshop, at least that's my experience with like every single bookshop that I was in, and there's the small little section poetry, especially here in Germany, English poetry, only in like really big bookstores. And I kid you not, 80% are books like these. And I'm just looking for modern poets that are my age, that are from my time, whatever, or a bit older, whatever, even younger, that create art with their pencil and with their words. And I sadly cannot find them because they're not published, because they do not get a chance, because these books continue to be amazing and sold out everywhere. I'm happy for all these authors. Again, I just wished that more authors got the opportunity to do this and are able to also stand in the poetry section because they use imagery, because they care about their words, like Dakota Warren or more Ocean Vuong. I think Ocean Vuong is the only book I found that I could say, yeah, this poet I want to read. I just want to go into a bookstore and not only find these. That's what I wish for. And I'm not saying that because I want to be a published poet one day. Yeah, but my book is not even halfway finished, so not talking about that. And I never submitted anything, but I just know that there are amazing people out there who have amazing potential and write amazing things. And I just wish that I would discover them when I am in the bookshop. But I don't. And I believe if people continue to only see these books, it's just sad because they're not really experiencing this amazing world of words, of literature, because it's so rich. And it's something I'm really passionate about, not only because I write myself, but because it is so amazing what people can do and how they devote their time to one poem and make it into something so intricate, but at the same time so beautiful that you just want to wrap yourself up in the words. There's amazing stuff out there, and I highly recommend you to find this stuff. Find the stuff that you like. If you like the stuff, that's totally fine. But if my words kind of made you feel like, oh yeah, she has a point, and poetry is interesting, it actually can be cool, even if it's not as easy and as relatable as these authors write. I appreciate poetry just for the way that it is. I do not need to analyze it. Obviously, it's so much fun when I have a poem and I analyze it and I'm like, how the hell did that person think of that? But when I read something out loud and I love the words, that's all I care about. And I'm in love and I feel things. When I feel something while reading a poem, that's all I need. And I sadly do not feel anything when I read these poems. So this new kind of poetry definitely is allowed to be there. Absolutely. I mean, otherwise I don't think it would be published. It's a very lucrative business, very lucrative art because people love relatability, people love ease. In this fast living world, we just don't necessarily have the time to look at a poem and read it for like an hour and then dissect it. Absolutely not. That's what the academics are here for. We do that. But if you want to enjoy poetry, please do not be afraid to read a poem and maybe not understand anything. If you like the language, if you read it out loud or listened to it, and if you think, oh yeah, this sounds beautiful, I like this, that's enough. That's all it does. Because you also have to think about back in the day when people were writing, naming like huge names here like Shakespeare or Christopher Marlowe, when they wrote in their plays, in their poems, whatever, they used very complicated language. They used words that most people just did not know. Shakespeare wrote for the masses. Shakespeare was schooled, but the majority of the audience was not schooled. There were lots of people who were illiterate. So they loved this work, not because they were able to understand it, but because it was beautiful and it was new and it was exciting and it made language come to life and it made you feel things. And that's all I think poetry needs. It does not need advice. It does not need relatability. I think art can do that just by being there and being there for you. This new kind of poetry, in my opinion, doesn't really care about rhyme or line breaks. Totally fine. You do not have to. But if you make a poem complicated to read, I believe that's very bad. I believe that's contradictory because poetry is meant to be read. And if you cannot read it, it's like creating a game and you're not able to play it, in my opinion. Like that's, you only look at the pictures, but you're not able to really dive into it at all. You do not have any power over it. Stylistic devices are trivial. They're not really important. They're irrelevant. If a metaphor is used, a symbol, an image is used, it is most of the time random. And if you think about it more and more, you find out that, yeah, it might not be the most fitting here. Again, talking subjective, of course. It depends on what side you want to look at, but you really do find that, in my opinion. Statements, advice giving is what this is. Helping people, giving advice. And I think that's pretty. I think there's a difference between poetry or art being there for you, just because it is, and poetry and art giving you advice. Do you see the difference? But also the correlation between the two? So this wants to be here for you by giving you advice and telling you what to do, and or telling you you're alone, you're not just lonely. Just one example, I just hate that, sorry. This is like a friend talking to you constantly, maybe even a bit drunk. Be like, listen, you're gonna be fine. This guy is a douchebag and you deserve so much better. Inspired by Rachel Oates, by the way. And poetry that I like just wraps me in a blanket. It is not a person that talks to me constantly or tells me things and tells me what to do. It's just, I wrap myself in a blanket, or I'm being pushed into the ocean because it's so devastating and it's cold. It's just, that's what poetry is for me. It's there for me without talking to me. This is so weird. Okay. Sometimes, I gotta say, it's even a bit pretentious. Amanda Lovelace wrote 2 entire pages on you have to eat. I'm not kidding, I'm gonna insert a photo. As someone who struggles with eating disorder and body dysmorphia ever since I was like 7 years old, reading that just kind of insulted me in a way. If that's her thing, absolutely. But since this is sort of the advice-giving thing that poetry is, someone telling you you have to eat, who are you to tell me what to do? I know you want to help me, but you can't, especially when it comes to mental health. And these books focus on mental health. These books focus on insanely important topics like mental health. Love is always, we always focused on that for as long as we were alive. And Rupi Kaur, especially ethnicity, heritage, being an immigrant, her parents being immigrants. So very important stuff, so important. I just wish I could feel more when I read your poems that are obviously about important topics. So when I read advice books, maybe that's just my opinion because I hate like nonfiction books. I cannot, I always find them a bit pretentious because I'm like, who are you to tell me that? This is so general and I'm not general. I'm not anyone, I'm me. And that has nothing to do with, oh yeah, my name is Victoria, this is me. I'm like, I'm an individual. No, this is just every single person is unique. Everyone has the right to say, well, I'm not anyone. You know, you cannot generalize my problems. As I am in therapy, for example, and I know that some people will say, yeah, but you know, some things really are really good, and I agree. But I, for example, need to constantly talk about what I'm going through, otherwise I'll go crazy. So when I talk about my problems, it helps me immensely. But some people do not like to talk about it. They write about it. They maybe write it down in a diary. So when you say, talk about your problems, it helps everyone, you're wrong, because it doesn't. When you say it's important to connect with your problems, to connect with your issues, or not only issues, also the positive things, and deal with them in a way that feels most appropriate for you. Write in a diary, talk to yourself, talk to someone. It is different. That's just an example to show you how every single individual is so different. And when someone generalizes something so much, I don't know. I always have the feeling that these people sometimes have a God complex because they're like, yeah, I can tell you what to do. I'm smart enough, I'm omniscient, and no one is. I know a lot about my mental health, about what helped me. And maybe I can tell you about my experiences and what helped me, but I will never call it advice that is for everyone. Now, of course, you could argue these do not want to be for everyone, but they're so general that they kind of are. But it strips you of your individuality. It strips you of you. And it strips the poet of you. So yeah. Anyway, as I already said, I feel like these are first drafts and sometimes interpretation of what a poem could have been. And imagery is randomly chosen. I already talked about this. Now in the beginning I talked about speaker and poet, just a quick definition. When you have like someone saying, I was blah blah blah. In my newest poem I said, you crafted me. So me in this case is the speaker. Poet is Victoria Bernadette. But the speaker is the me. So there is actually a difference. So when you analyze poetry, for example, in school or university, at least that's what I learned, it's always important to write the speaker argues. Don't use the poet feels this and that. You could say, I think the poet uses, I don't know, alliteration in this line and uses this kind of rhyme scheme. But when you talk about the feelings and the content of a poem, use the speaker. I think this is like, you're always safe with that option. This is just a thing that I want to say because I don't want anyone to be confused. But I don't know, I learned this in school. I don't know if everyone does. We talked a lot about it. I bet there were things that I forgot. I bet there were things that I did not mention. And I bet there were things that I mentioned and I'm like, huh, you didn't need to really say anything about that. But I'm gonna end this video on this note. I'm gonna leave your recommendations down below. I actually wanted to read you a couple of more poems that I found really, really pretty. If you want a video of like my favorite poems, which are not a lot actually, give me a thumbs up or comment down below if you want to see that. I will definitely film a video for this, but this was focusing on new poetry or this new kind of poetry, modern Insta poetry, and dissecting it and looking at it from an artistic point of view. I hope I did not offend anyone. I just wanted to make this video to show you what poetry can be and what poetry was for a lot of years and what you learn at university, what poetry is and what I love about it, what it makes it one of the most important things in my life. So saying, these are a good start. These are definitely a good start. I would not recommend buying them. Not even looking from an artistic point of view, but a lot of these pages are not filled. So save some trees. But if you want to read some, find them online, you will. And there are a bunch of them online. Or go to these writers' Instagrams, they post them online as well. And that's for free. I'm gonna link these books down below. I'm gonna link my favorite collections down below. Some poets that I absolutely love reading. And maybe this is the start for you. I actually have no idea. I do find poetry intimidating myself, but not from the view of, oh, I'm not able to understand it, but because I'm scared to read it, because then I think, oh god, I will never be able to write like that. It's just, you know, that's just when you're an artist of a particular art, and then you consume that art and you're like, oh god, and you're constantly comparing yourself. I know you shouldn't, but you do. It's just, I do that. Okay, anyway, I'm gonna link everything down below. If you have favorite poems, if you have poets that you love, if you are a poet yourself, let's come together and, I don't know, comment down below. If you have an Instagram account, I would love to follow you. I would love to support you. You can all support each other. And if you want to support me, you can on my Instagram. I post little snippets of my poetry and sometimes whole poems. There are also other ways to support me and my art. Liking this video, for example, if you liked it. Comment down below what you would like to see next. And you can support me even more with a subscription. So if you haven't yet, subscribe to my channel. And don't forget to click the little bell next to the subscription button, because then you get notified whenever I upload. This was a long video. I hope I said everything I wanted to say. My dog needs to pee. He just woke up. I would love to hear about your thoughts, so please leave them in the comments if you want to share anything. And yeah, poetry is art. Always remember that. It does not have to be complicated. Here are some videos that I did on poetry. Here I write a poem, and here I read a poetry collection, and then also dissect some of it, and then, I don't know, analyze a bit. So if you want to get into that more, you can watch my videos. Or, as I said, check out Rachel Oates' channel. She does not only make poetry content, but I love her poetry content, so definitely check out her videos. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I know it's a long video, but thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and hopefully see you in my next video. Bye! Speaker is what? I don't know what the speaker is. Can you tell me? It's gotta be enough. Whew.